Hello everyone! Today I will be showing you how to make your very own Yoshi plushie. I will be making the classic green Yoshi. The pattern is from So Desune or Choly Night. This is a free pattern and the link to this pattern will be in the video description. Let's get started. First, you will want to print your pattern with your printer. You will use the diamonds to line up multiple pages and tape them together. Make sure to cut out the pieces on the solid line, not the dotted line. You can use scissors or a blade, just make sure you're using a cutting mat if you use a blade. Once you're finished cutting out all of your pieces, you want to pick your fabric and figure out which pieces go to what color. Each pattern piece will say how many to cut out, which part it is, and what color to use. For classic Yoshi, you will need green, orange, yellow, red, and white. When doing two of one piece, mirror the piece by flipping the pattern paper over or fold the fabric to double it up. Be sure to check the directions of your stretch and your nap. For the poly pellet pouch, I choose to use muslin instead of scraps. It's a cheap fabric and I usually use my scraps for other things. For lighter fabrics, I use an air erase fabric marker. For dark fabrics, I use chalk. Use the method that you like best. Now you're going to need to cut out all your pieces. I did skip recording this part to save some time for the video. Always make sure to pause if you need to. Now I will be adding the face details. I will be using embroidering, but other methods are available in the original instructions. When embroidering, I start by hooping my stabilizer. I use cutaway stabilizer. Since I pre-cut my fabric pieces, I stitch the cut guides and use them to line up my pieces. I attach the pieces by using sewing machine safe spray adhesive. In this method, you do want to spend extra time lining up the pieces so things don't end up crooked. Before embroidering, make sure to add water-soluble top stabilizer to the nostril area. I stitched out the nostrils in a darker green. Now I'm changing my thread to white and doing the first eye stitch. If you have multiple pieces in the hoop like I do, make sure you move any extra fabric out of the way before starting this stitch. Use this stitch to line up a white piece of fabric and stitch the second stitch for the eyes. Once the stitch is completed, remove the hoop and trim the white close to the stitches without cutting the stitches or the green fabric. You'll want this trimmed pretty close, so using sharp scissors helps a lot. Once you're done trimming it, make sure you remove the fuzzies and add a top stabilizer. Taping the stabilizer down with masking tape helps to keep it from getting caught in your machine. Now we can finish stitching out the rest of the eyes. It's going to start with the white around the border. I'm going to skip ahead in the video so you guys don't have to watch the whole stitch. Next, we switch to the black for the main part of the eyes. Now we switch to white for the eye shine. Now that the stitch is done, we can remove the hoop, cut away any jump threads, and take off any top stabilizers that we have left. Now we can remove the pieces from the hoop and cut away the bottom stabilizer. Now that the details are done, we can move on to sewing. We will start by sewing the cheek darts, only the side ones, not the top one. When sewing the darts, start with a 1/4 inch seam allowance and taper out to the edge until you sew off the edge of the fabric. Again, make sure you don't sew that top dart, that's for later. Repeat what we just did for the other cheek. Now we will sew the head front piece to the cheek. Make sure to check the pattern if you need extra help on where the starting and stopping points are. Now we will sew the head back to the cheek. When trying to clip them together, the fabric pieces will seem like they're curving away from each other, so just make sure you curve it with the fabric as you clip it. Using lots of clips or pins on this part helps keep it lined up. Now we will add the front and back head pieces to the other cheek. Rewind the video if you need a reminder on how to do that. Once you have your head pieces attached to both cheeks, switch your thread to the spike color. You will have 6 spike pieces to make 3 spikes. Lay them out with right sides facing each other. Pin or clip them together so they're not moving while you sew them. Sew all 3 spikes, leaving the opening on the straight side for turning. Once you're done sewing the spikes, check the seams and resew if you need to. Trim the seam allowance to reduce the bulkiness of the spike and turn the pieces. When trimming the seam allowance, be careful not to trim too close to the stitches. Stuff the spikes lightly and baste them closed. I forgot this part when I was recording the video. Once the spikes are ready, baste them to the back of the head. The back of the head is shaped more like a moon. Just a reminder, a basting stitch is a straight stitch you sew as close as you can to the edge, just to hold the pieces on. Once your spikes are basted on, turn them inward and sew the head backs together. Stop at the marked areas on the pattern for turning. Make sure to line up the seams as you clip it together. Before sewing the head, make sure to switch the thread to the body color. Check your stitch and trim any threads that poke through. Clip or pin the eye back piece to the head. It works best to clip the ends and then curve the piece as you clip the rest. Now we can sew the back eye piece to the head. Turn it inside out so the front cheeks meet. Make sure to line up the seams and stop at the marked area on the pattern so you have an opening for turning. Now we will sew the eye front that we embroidered to the front of the cheeks. Start by pinning or clipping them in place on the ends and then in the center. Now fold your piece so the eye fronts and back meet and pin the front and back together, including the cheek darts. Make sure to line up your seams. When sewing this part together, start on one cheek dart and end on the other. Be careful around the eye curves. It's a good habit to always check your seams. When I looked at these, I saw the eyes were crooked, and that made me unhappy, so I decided to fix it. Before turning, you want to trim your seam allowance. You want to have a good pair of sharp scissors to make this easier. This piece should be pretty easy to turn right side out with the hole you made. Now you could stuff it with polyfill or the stuffing of your choice. Make sure you stuff his eyes firmly so that they don't fall over. Once his eyes are stuffed nice and firm, you can stuff the rest of his head at a regular firmness. Next, you will ladder stitch the turning hole shut. I like to go back and forth a couple times, but I did skip ahead so you don't have to watch this whole thing. Now you can tie it off and hide the knot in the seam. Now that the base of his head is done, we will now sew the body. Grab your side pieces and your belly pieces. The straighter side of the belly sews to the body. Clip the raw edges together so the straight edge follows the curve of the body. On curves like this, the more clips you use, the better. Start sewing from the neck to the tail tip. Repeat the steps of sewing the belly piece to the body piece for the other side. Clip the body pieces together, down the belly and up the back. Make sure to leave a hole in the neck for the opening. When sewing this piece, I do recommend switching to the belly color when you sew the belly and to the body color when you sew the body. I did not do this, but I wish I did. Again, make sure you don't sew the neck shut so you have a turning hole. Check your seams and add a few more stitches to the tail if you need to. Trim the seam allowance at the corners and the points. Sorry about that, my light died. While you're trimming, make sure not to trim too close so you don't cut the stitches. Now you can turn it right side out. This is about when I realized that I should have changed my thread color to the belly color. Now we need to sew our poly pellet pouch. Make sure when you sew it to leave an opening for the pellets to go in. Again, for this piece, I just use unbleached muslin, but it's okay to use any scraps that you have available. Add your poly pellets to your pouch. Using a funnel helps a lot. I know some people might use like beans or rice for this part, but I choose to use the poly pellets because they do not mold. Don't overfill it or it will be hard to sew. Now we need to sew the pouch shut. Hand sewing is recommended, but I use my sewing machine. I just make sure to go very slow and move the pellets out of the way as I go. Just a warning, you can break a needle if you hit one of those pellets while you're sewing. Now we will stuff the body, starting at the tail tip. Once you have the tail stuffed, stop and add the poly pellet pouch. I did struggle with this a little bit because the neck hole is not as big as the poly pellet pouch. Once you get it in, place it in the bottom area to help it sit. Now you can finish stuffing the body. Make sure to stuff around the pouch. Once you've finished stuffing the body, get some thread and tie a knot in the end. And now we're going to clinch or gather stitch the neck shut. Once you go around the whole circle, pull it tight and push the extra fabric down into the hole. I added a knot to hold the clinch stitch in place. This is not in the original instruction. Don't cut your thread because we will use it in this next step. Now we are going to ladder stitch the head to the body. As you're doing this, you want to keep making sure that the head is straight. This is a bit tricky, so make sure you take your time. Once it looks straight, do 2 or 3 total times around, tie it off and hide the knot. I'm just going to jump ahead in the video so you can see me just tying it off after doing 3 times around. Now we'll be moving on to sewing the legs. Match up your thigh pieces right sides facing and start to clip them. Use the pattern to know where to stop because we will not sew the whole piece. I marked it with 2 clips on where we need to stop. Now sew both thigh pieces, stopping at the marked area. Once you have the thigh pieces sewn, we're going to attach the top of his shoe or his ankle piece to the leg. Start by clipping the ends and then curve the fabric as you add more clips. Make sure to repeat these steps with the second leg. Once you have the ankle bands clipped in place, sew them to the legs. Again, make sure to repeat with the second leg. Now grab your shoe pieces and clip them right sides facing, making 2 shoes. We will start by just sewing the top part of the shoe, so just clip that part for now. Sew only the top on both shoes. Open up the shoe pieces you just sewed and pin them to the ankle with the right sides facing. Start by pinning both ends and then the middle, making sure there's not a bunch of extra fabric. Repeat with the second shoe and ankle. Once you have your raw edges lined up and pinned in place, sew both shoes and ankles. Here's a little reminder to always check your seams because it's easy to miss on curved parts. Now take your leg pieces and fold them together. The right sides need to be facing and your seams lined up while you pin in place. Yeah, I'll have to find that clip later. We will not be sewing the bottom of the shoe, so make sure you pin from the very top of the leg where you finished sewing last time, all the way to the bottom of the shoe. Sometimes my sewing machine doesn't like to go over all the seams, so it's fighting me. Remember to repeat this with the other leg, minus the thread breaks if you can help it. Now grab your sole pieces and clip them in place to the bottom of the shoe. I like to fold my piece in half and mark with a clip like the center so you can line those up with the seams, and it helps you line the whole piece up properly. Make sure your seams and raw edges line up nicely. Once you have it clipped together properly, sew completely around the whole sole of the shoe. This will create a closed piece. We do want that to happen. Repeat those steps of clipping and sewing on the second leg. Now we're going to cut through one layer of fabric to make turning holes for the legs. Now turn them right side out. Stuff the legs starting at the toes. Now to ladder stitch the legs to the body. You can find the placement marks on the pattern, or you can put it where you want them. I tried to use pins to hold it in place, but my pins were too short. so I just decided to hold it in place while I began to ladder stitch. This part is a bit tricky, so make sure you take your time. Repeat ladder stitching the leg to the body with the second leg. Take your time lining up the legs before sewing them on. Now it's starting to look a little bit like Yoshi. We're going to move him aside and sew the nose. Start by sewing all the large darts around the whole nose piece. Now we're going to turn it right side out once all the darts are sewn and stuff it with the material that we choose. To get a nice round shape, you do want to stuff it very firmly. On this step, it said it was optional, but I did need to gather stitch the nose closed to make the hole a bit smaller. Once the hole is smaller, or if you don't need to do that step, you can now ladder stitch the nose to the face. Check your placement before ladder stitching. The eye should just be peeking over the nose. Ladder stitch all the way around 2 or 3 times. I had to use the table to hold it in place. Once you've ladder stitched 2 or 3 times around, you can now tie off the knot and hide it in the seam. His nose adds a lot of weight, so I think next time I'll stuff his neck better. Moving on to the arms. Make sure the right sides are facing and clip all around the edges on both arms. Sew all the way around each arm, creating a closed piece. Repeat sewing all the way around on the second arm. Using sharp scissors, trim seam allowance all around the curves. Careful not to cut too close. Snip through 1 layer of fabric to make a turning hole. Use the pattern guide if you need to. Once you've snipped the hole, you can now turn the arms right side out. Stuff both arms semi-firmly, starting at what would be the fingertips, all the way up to the shoulder. Now we'll be adding sculpt stitches to the hands. You can use heavy-duty thread, or like I did, I used doubled up all-purpose thread. Once you've doubled it up, tie a knot in the end. Don't forget to use your pattern guide to know where to put them. Insert the needle between the stitches in the seam and bring it out at the top of the guide. If that doesn't work, you can also go in through the arm stuffing hole. This won't work for every piece, but it works for this one. Once you have your needle through the top of the placement guide, wrap thread around the outside of the hand, push back through all layers of the hand and out again at the top. Gently pull the thread to add detail. Do this a few more times to get a desired shape. Make sure that the wrapped around threads are laying in the correct detail area. Once you're happy with that detail, cross over to the next sculpting area, starting at the top. And repeat what you just did to create the shape. Tie off the thread when you're happy with the details. I chose to hide my knot on the inside of the arm. Repeat the sculpting details on the second hand. Now we will ladder stitch one of the arms to the body. Use the placement guides on the pattern if you need to. Hold the arm in the desired position while you start to ladder stitch. After you've ladder stitched 2 or 3 times around, tie off and hide the knot in the seam. Repeat what you just did to attach the second arm to the body. Again, after 2 or 3 times around, tie off and hide the knot in the seam. Make sure to cut your thread close so it doesn't show. Now for the final touch, his shell. Start by changing your thread to the shell color. Sew all the shell darts, there should be 4 total. Line up the inner shell ring to the main shell. The right side should be facing and clip in place. Sew all the way around the inner shell ring. Turn right side out and trim any threads if necessary. Grab your bottom shell piece and pin it to the top shell piece, making sure the right sides are facing. Sew all the way around the circle, creating a closed piece. Now make a small cut through only one layer of fabric in the center of the bottom piece. This is the flat side. Turn the shell right side out through the hole you just cut. Flatten out the shell and do a straight top stitch around the base of the shell. This is the seam where the white and the red meet. Do your best to top stitch right along that seam. Once you've top stitched all the way around, trim your threads close so that it's not visible. Stuff your shell through the hole that you cut earlier. Find where to place the shell. You can use the pattern guide if you need to. Once you've got your placement down, ladder stitch the shell to the back. After 2 to 3 times around, tie off the thread and hide the knot in the seam. Your Yoshi is now complete. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope it helped you make your own Yoshi. Don't forget to like and subscribe to get more videos like this. If you made a Yoshi of your own, I'd love to hear about it. Please share in the comments.